Hey, good Monday morning to you. I'm meteorologist Brian McClure. It's August 24th. All right. I deliberately did not do a video the past couple of days over the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. I wanted to spend time with my family, my son especially, before he went back to school today. And also, quite honestly, I feel like in today's world, maybe too much information is a bad thing. In other words, in 2020, we've almost gotten to the point where we just constantly are seeing information. And if you go back and you watch my video from Friday, quite honestly, not a lot has changed. There's been some subtle changes, absolutely, especially with Marco. But in terms of big scale, like large scale thinking, there actually hasn't been a whole lot of change, especially with Laura. It's pretty much right on track. All right, let's get right to it then and show you what we are talking about. Here is what's left of Marco. Gosh, my goodness, if you watched any news headlines over the weekend, which hopefully you didn't, hopefully you do like me and you take not only a mental break, but a break from work and a break from everything over the weekend, that's my time to really escape and just get away. Because if you don't do that, man, sometimes this stuff can be overwhelming. If you saw any of these national headlines, it was just nuts. They acted like Marco was going to be a Cat 5, going to obliterate everybody in the Gulf of Mexico. I heard Fujiwara. I heard Mega Storm. I heard all kinds of garbage. And the fact of the matter is, Marco's fallen apart. Okay? Here it is, this little swirl right out here, and it's done. Okay? It probably won't even produce tropical storm force winds in Louisiana, because what's going to ultimately end up happening now is the little swirl is just going to drift off to the west like this, and it's never going to be able to get back underneath all this heavy rain and its stronger winds that have been displaced off to the northeast. By the way, if you ever want to know, when we talk about wind shear as a meteorologist, this is a classic example. Look at these high cloud tops out here in the Western Gulf. You see how they're like really just flying off to the northeast. And then what I want you to notice is these cloud tops down here near Laura, they're going in the opposite direction, okay? That really gives you a good idea of upper level wind shear. So the wind shear against Marco right now is pushing like this, which is why it's dead. All its strongest winds and rain have been obliterated and pushed off to the northeast into Florida. And so now there's just this little swirl left over. With Laura, on the other hand, its little center is right down in here. Its strongest winds in the upper levels are pushing like that. Not what I would call great for it, but not what I would call destructive. No. The other thing, too, with Laura is it is going to head towards an area here over the next couple of days. It's going to get out here where this area doesn't have any strong wind shear. And that's what I meant when I said, if you go back and watch my video from Friday, quite honestly, not a lot's changed. Laura has stayed right on track. It stayed weak as expected because it went over all that mountainous terrains in the Caribbean, Dominican Republic, Haiti, now Cuba. And so that has kept it rather weak, which is great news for anybody across, the country. But I also said all along that if it were going to strengthen, it was going to happen once it got to the Gulf and finally away from wind shear. When you look at little Marco, you can see its little spin. See it right there, southeast of Louisiana? That's it, right there. There's nothing there. It's just a little swirl. If you were in a boat or on an oil platform, this is sunshine out here, okay? All the heavy rain has been displaced over here. So the only thing that's going to happen now is the little swirl with Marco is just going to drift over here and it will fall apart. That's it. Okay? You go to Laura, south of Cuba. Here's its center, right out in here, and the opposite is trying to happen. It's trying to get organized. Now, the good news is, again, still interacting with high terrain of Cuba, so that's helping us a whole lot right now because it can't get good moist inflow from the northeast. It is getting good moist inflow from the south, so that's why it's almost like it's a halfway trying to develop right now. And like I also said earlier, yes, it is still undergoing some wind shear right back here on the back side, but it's going to be moving away from that. You can see on this graphic, this really perfectly illustrates the wind shear. Okay, here's where Marco is located right in here, and these are the strong winds against it. Here's where Laura is right here, and you can kind of make out the wind shear right here on the back side. There it is. But notice the area where there's very little wind shear. Right there. Right there. Southeastern Gulf. Okay. So again, if you go back a whole 3 days ago, there really isn't a lot of difference in what I've been talking about in terms of wind shear. If you go to today, here, let me get a different crayon color here. Let's go to this one. Okay. Go to today where Marco is, which is located right in there. Here is the model predicted wind shear. That's the GFS American model. It's doing fantastic, predicting it perfectly. And by the way, over Laura, here is the predicted wind shear on the backside. Perfect. Okay. It's done a fantastic job with these. I will admit it was a little off on Marco's eastward jaunt, but in terms of long-term path, it's done pretty good in terms of computer model guidance. Let's go out into tomorrow at the same time. Okay, here is the wind shear now. Tomorrow, I should say. Here's the wind shear tomorrow. And then here's the wind shear on the backside of Laura. Well, look what has happened. Laura has moved away from that wind shear, and it's in between the two. It's not here, and it's not here. Okay? So basically, if Laura's going to strengthen, it's going to be in a perfect area to strengthen tomorrow, Tuesday time frame. So depending on when you watch this, all right? But I'm taping this here on Monday. Okay, so it's going to be in a perfect environment Tuesday to strengthen. As it approaches the coastline, this would be Wednesday, midday. It doesn't look like it's in a bad area. Here's the wind shear right here to the north of it, and here's the wind shear on the backside. But it doesn't look like what I'd call perfect. In other words, it starts to run into a little bit of wind shear right here. So as Laura heads towards what appears to be somewhere between the Texas and Louisiana coastline, it probably will start to run into a little bit of wind shear again there. So that might keep it from getting too terribly strong, but it's going to be close. It could be a Cat 2, maybe borderline Cat 3. It really just depends. Here's what I think is going to happen. I think it's going to strengthen a lot out here in the middle, peak in intensity, and then slowly start to weaken as it approaches the coastline, but not by a lot, but by a little. So it likely will make landfall as a hurricane, but I don't see this, again, in a perfect scenario like the Irmas, the Dorians, the Marias, the Michaels of the past, where it's just perfect everywhere, perfect water temperatures, perfect wind shear, perfect. There's not perfect, but it's better. It is definitely going to be in a better environment here over the next couple of days than it ever has been during its entire lifespan. So yes, Laura is going to strengthen, and it will be a hurricane, and it will intensify. I guess what I'm just trying to say is, like always, I'm not a hype type person, and I've seen so many, both YouTube wannabe meteorologists and also the national media just going gangbusters, and I'm like, well, there's still some things working against it. All right, all that being said, let's go back to today, and let's go down to this view. Let's go to here. All right, and then let's go to surface wind. And here we go. Okay, this is right about now. And what I want you to notice is the strongest winds are actually not around the center of Laura. They are displaced well to the northeast, actually on the other side of Cuba, between the pass of Cuba and the Keys. That's where the strongest winds are. But that makes sense. With weak tropical systems, they're very just discombobulated. You know, they kind of zip around with some winds, but they can kind of fling off the strongest winds well displaced from the center. So this isn't that big of a surprise. And by the way, here's a little weak Marco. And again, you can see there's very little wind with it. Okay, let's go forward in time. Let's watch what happens. All right. Tomorrow, Laura finally gets away from land for the first time almost in its history. And it pulls away from the Caribbean, and it's moving out into the Gulf. Look what happens. Finally, it starts to get a much more consolidated center. You finally start to see winds coming around on the west side, and the strongest of winds pull closer to the center and on the east and northeastern side. That, to me, looks more like it finally is becoming a hurricane. Okay, that's tomorrow. Not a surprise. It's over warm water. It's finally away from wind shear. We go into Wednesday, and as it approaches, again, what appears to be probably like the Texas-Louisiana coastline, it still has strong winds, and it appears to be wrapping them almost all the way around the center. But notice there's a little weakness right in here. That's probably because of some dry air, some wind shear, but generally speaking, it looks pretty good. Strong winds almost all the way around the center. So you see my point. It strengthens, intensifies, and then it kind of holds its own. And then if anything, maybe right as it goes to the coastline, do you notice? Do you see it? Did you see it? Here, I'll pull it back again. There it is. And then, okay, maybe not as bad right there at the coastline. I'm not saying it totally backs off, but there are some signs that right in here, it's a little weaker. I think what's happening is, I think the computer model guidance is basically saying, hey, there's going to be some wind shear in here, and so maybe it doesn't come in at full strength. Maybe it kind of comes in at half strength. I don't know. Kind of hard to tell, but that's the way it's looking. If I go to, let's see, yeah, that's the surface wind. Yeah, so that's probably the best one to show, but if I go further out, you can tell, okay, there it goes. It makes landfall. And this is GFS American model. I like how it's performed during the entire lifespan of Laura. I really do. And I think during its entire lifespan, I think it's had a pretty good handle. Has it been off by a little? Of course, all model guidance is. After all, it's model guidance. Hello. But it was the first one to say farther west, farther south of Florida. It was also the one that said all along, I want to show you this, that this high pressure, here, let me pull this view back out because I think you have to see this to really understand. Here you go. It was the model all along that said this high pressure, okay, so it's basically a pressure map, that this would be too strong for the storm to come directly at Florida, and instead it would take a more southerly path. So remember, when I first started this, was it a week ago? It was almost a week ago, maybe like 6 days ago. We had first initially said, well, gosh, maybe it could come right at Florida if this high pressure isn't strong enough. And then as the days went on, it was like each day went on, it was like farther south, farther south, farther south. You see my point? And so this was the model that kind of first said, hey, this high pressure, it's pretty strong. Okay, well, look what it's still doing. It still has that high pressure strong, and you can see the outer edge of it is way out here. So there's no chance of Laura doing like this. I had people still this weekend, I couldn't believe it. Oh, I still had people bugging me saying, you're wrong, Brian. It's coming right at Florida, and it's still going to make a turn. And I'm sitting here thinking, you know, okay, I don't know where it comes from, but it's not coming from science. Let's put it that way. This is just flat out fact. This is a strong high pressure. And that high pressure is what has kept Laura all along going a more southerly path. All right, that being said, let's go out to tomorrow at the same time. The high pressure is not as strong tomorrow, but it is still there. And if anything, it's kind of reached out a little bit to the west, but it's not quite as strong. But you can see this is almost like a fence, okay? The storm cannot move north into that fence. All right, let's go out to Wednesday, and let's see what that high pressure looks like. Okay. Now, finally, the high pressure is weakening, especially on the western side. You see that right there? Okay, so what this is, here's the western, here's the eastern edge of what appears to be a pathway. So think of this as a roadway map for tropical storms and hurricanes where they can go, because you've got a high pressure over here, you've got a little high pressure over here, and so your one pathway is basically right up through here. That is what's happening. And that is why the guidance is essentially saying, hey, it's somewhere here near the Texas, Louisiana coastline. Somewhere right there, probably near the border. And it's hard to tell. Now, obviously, when it comes right down to it, those specifics will matter. For example, just a little to the west, all of a sudden you're talking Houston, Galveston. A little to the east, and you're talking more like right up through western parts of Louisiana. So that is going to matter. And by the way, right on the border there would be right about Beaumont. So those differences matter. So as a meteorologist, first you break it down large scale, and you talk about why it's going to go where it's going to go and why it could intensify or why it won't. Then you start to go smaller and smaller. And you start to go smaller as you get closer. So when you're a week out, listen, you can't pick the exact spot it's going to hit. And all the YouTube wannabe meteorologists and all the people out there in the national media that want to say where it's going to go and it's going to be the, you can't do that. As a scientist, I can tell you right now, you start big and then you hone in. Okay? So with Laura all along, we've honed in. First, it was like, well, maybe East Coast Florida. Then it was like, hey, maybe Southeast Florida. Then it was, well, maybe the Keys. Then it was, hey, it's going to miss Florida altogether and it's going to go more a southern route, but maybe the Panhandle of Florida. Then it was, well, maybe turning up towards New Orleans. Then it, you see what I'm saying? We've been trending that way, and that's what you do. You slowly hone in on it. This is the latest official forecast track, and I wouldn't be surprised if it falls anywhere in here. But right now, I would trend a little bit more on the western side, only because my gut has said all along it's wanted to go a little bit farther on the southerly path around that high pressure. But again, that's just my gut. But I think this is a good forecast path. And yes, you can see here the intensification from a storm to a hurricane right in this area. So they're pretty much thinking the same thing that we are. All that being said, this is here. Let me go back to pressure and low locations, and then let me go down to here, Gulf of Mexico. Again, I think this has been doing a good job. Here it brings out the possible low locations. In other words, the possible locations of where the center would be. And notice they're actually pretty tight, and then they do spread out a little bit right here at the end. And notice on the eastern edge, would be bringing it up through Louisiana. On the western edge, would be taking it into Texas. This is Houston, this is Galveston, this is Beaumont, okay? So that kind of gives you an idea of your range here from Louisiana and into Texas. And if you split the difference, it's basically like that, okay? So I wouldn't be surprised if it's still really, really, really close to that Louisiana-Texas borderline. That kind of gives you an idea. Let's see, what else was I going to show you? There was one last thing. It was, I think, the waves. I wanted to show, somebody had asked about, well, what about the waves in the Gulf? It's interesting. The waves here, that's actually not the best one. It'll have to do. The waves are interesting with this. You can kind of see it right there. Okay, there you go. See how tomorrow, all of a sudden, the winds and the waves pick up in the Gulf, which, you know, of course, makes sense. But what I want you to notice, especially, obviously, because I'm a meteorologist in Florida, most of my viewership is in Florida. And a lot of people will ask, for example, here on the west coast of Florida, right in here, okay, even though Laura's going to pass way to the south like this, will it send and kick back some really good surf so we can get in some surfing, some boogie boarding, whatever? I think with this one, you'll see some swells tomorrow, and you can kind of see that. See how it kind of like all of a sudden just, it grows. See that? And it does grow northward and obviously westward. But what I want you to notice is, obviously, because the path of Laura is going this way, and its winds are spinning like this, the bulk of the wave and wind action is going to be pushed westward across the Gulf and northwestward, not really back at Florida. So we get some swells and a little bit of a push of some waves for tomorrow, Tuesday, into Tuesday night, maybe even Wednesday. Yeah, but it's going to be more, as you can see, pointed in this direction towards Louisiana and Texas for obvious reasons. So really, all in all, in a weird way, Florida isn't going to feel much. To tell you the truth, out there right now, I think we're seeing just about as much as we're going to feel in terms of winds, because what's happening is today, let me go back to this map. Let's see, surface winds. Okay, wind speed. If you look at today, kind of right now actually, look at the wind flow across Florida. There it is. Okay, now let me go through tonight. Doesn't really change much. It does in the Keys. It's breezier in the Keys tonight. And then let me go through to tomorrow morning. Still doesn't change much. However, it is going to be breezier right at the coast, but it's an offshore blowing wind. So a lot of times in Florida, if it's an offshore blowing wind, which it will be from Fort Myers to Tampa Bay, etc., along the Gulf Coast, you're really not going to notice that big of a difference. It'll be breezier, but not that big of a difference. So it's not like you're getting a whole bunch of strong winds pushing up against the coastline of Florida. By the way, this is the 12Z model that's just coming in, and that kind of gives you a good idea. Okay, there you go. There's the 12Z. This just came in. I'm looking at it the first time, just as I'm showing you. And that kind of talks about what we just talked about. It's a little bit farther east. And by the way, that's the wind speeds. There's some pretty hefty wind speeds in here above hurricane force, right in there. There they are. Let me go to wind gusts. Okay. Yeah. Hurricane. Yeah, hurricane wind gust. To true, that looks like the highest I'm seeing is 88 right in there. There was a 90 something in there, but I lost it. Yeah, so there you go. So if that plays out, and again, that's just the latest model run that has just come in just by pure circumstance. That just came in while I was on the tail end of this video. If that plays out like that, then Houston and Galveston over here wouldn't see hardly anything. Everything would be out here in Louisiana. So again, that's just one model run. We'll see how this plays out, but that did shift a little bit to the east. So there you go. And it looks like more of the data is coming in right now. All right, so with that in mind, by the way, this is something that gets very frustrating as a professional meteorologist. I don't know why CBS News continues to do stuff like this, and a lot of other people do stuff like this. Back-to-back major storms barrel towards Gulf Coast. So just wrong. No. Laura is a tropical storm. Marco has fallen apart. I mean, technically, we're going to declare it a tropical storm still, but no, it's nothing. And Laura could become a major hurricane. It could, but there are definitely not two major storms in the Gulf of Mexico. So that's kind of a pet peeve of mine. I don't know why that continues to happen. All right. Gone long enough. If I have a chance, I'll put another video on later today, or maybe some graphics, but that kind of gives you an idea of what's going on. I think that's a good summary on this Monday. By the way, I wore my crab shirt today. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. I thought it was appropriate to wear a crab shirt. You know, a lot of times people are crabby on a Monday. Going back to work. Have a great Monday. Don't stress too much about this, but obviously Eastern Texas, Western Louisiana, I think those people really need to keep a close eye on Laura. All right, have a good Monday.